May 18th, 1565. Dawn. The sea around Malta boiled with sails, black, endless, silent. On the cliffs above the grand harbor, one old man watched the horizon turn red. Jean Perisseau de Valette, Grand Master of the Knights of St. John. He had 70 years behind him and perhaps 7 days left. He counted the banners, red, green, the crescent moon, symbols of the greatest empire on earth. The Ottomans had come, with 193 ships and 40,000 men. Malta held 600 knights and a few thousand farmers, sailors, and masons. Every number said they would fall, but Europe had no walls left beyond this island. For years, Suleiman the Magnificent had ruled half the known world. He had taken Belgrade, he had taken Rhodes. Malta was next, a stone in his path, and an insult he had not forgotten. The Knights of St. John had once defied him at Rhodes and escaped by sea. This time, he would finish what he began. He would crush the last crusaders and open the road to Rome. On Malta, the bells of Birgu rang before sunrise. The defenders moved like shadows, sharpening blades, carrying powder, whispering prayers. The old fortress smelled of salt, gunpowder, and fear. A mason hammered a cross into the stone wall, not for decoration, but for memory. When the walls fell, they would know where to die. Then, from the sea, drums, low, heavy, relentless. The first cannonball struck Fort St. Elmo at 8 in the morning. The siege of Malta had begun. 40,000 men had come to erase 600, but still, every knight on that wall knew what waited if they failed. The fall of Malta would open the gates of Europe. They would not yield. This is Europa, rise. The echo of that first cannonball rolled across the island like thunder. Then, silence. Even the gulls above the harbor stopped their cries. For a heartbeat, Malta itself seemed to hold its breath, and in that silence, every man on the wall understood what was coming. The Knights of St. John were not an army, they were a brotherhood, monks who fought in armor and prayed between battles. Each had taken a vow to defend the weak and die in service to God. Their fortress was their monastery, their sword a form of prayer. They had seen Jerusalem fall, watched Rhodes burn, and carried the order's banner across the sea to this barren rock. Now, on Malta, they would make their final stand. Their numbers were small, 600 knights from every corner of Europe, France, Spain, Italy, England, the Holy Roman Empire. Around them, 5,000 Maltese and hired soldiers, artisans, peasants, and sailors. The rest were children and the old, too proud to flee. The fortresses of Birgu, Senglea, and St. Elmo were half finished, their walls cracked from salt and age. Gunpowder was scarce, muskets mismatched, armor patched with leather and rope. But they had something the invaders did not: the unshakable belief that losing Malta meant losing Christendom itself. Out at sea, the Ottoman armada stretched beyond the horizon. Mustafa Pasha commanded the land forces, a veteran of countless sieges. Admiral Piali Pasha ruled the fleet with cold precision, and with them sailed the legendary corsair Turgut Reis, master of the sea, scourge of the Mediterranean. They brought 193 ships, 40,000 soldiers, and the best artillery in the world. Each gun was named as if alive: the Basilisk, the Dragon, the Voice of Mecca. Their orders were simple: take Malta, kill the knights, and open the road to Sicily. Inside Fort St. Angelo, Jean de Valette studied maps spread across a stone table worn by candlelight. He traced the coastline with his finger, every inlet, ridge, and cliff. He marked villages that could burn, wells that could be poisoned, bridges that could be destroyed. He knew they could not defend everything. They could only trade lives for time. He spoke quietly to his captains. "We will not surrender 1 inch," he said. "If the Turks take our walls, we fight from the rubble. If they take the rubble,
We fight from the graves beneath it." His men said nothing. They simply bowed their heads. Messages rode out across the island. Every bell tower rang. Every village sent what it could: grain, powder, timber, and men. In Birgu, blacksmiths turned plows into pikes and horseshoes into grape-shot. Masons sealed cracks in the walls with lime and sea sand. Women filled barrels with sand and water to harden the walls against cannon fire. Fishermen dragged iron chains from the harbor to block the enemy ships. Children carried buckets of powder between batteries, too small to lift a sword, but fearless under fire. Even the priests worked, hearing confessions by torchlight, blessing every man who picked up a weapon. An entire island preparing to die together. As night fell, the Ottoman armada loomed closer, a forest of masts and sails blotting out the stars. Campfires lit the distant hills like a second sky. From the ramparts, the defenders could hear faint voices in Turkish and Arabic, laughter carried by the wind, the ring of metal on stone as siege guns were put together. Each new sound was another nail in their coffin. But the knights did not flinch. At dawn, the watchtowers saw banners rising from the ships, the red of the Janissaries, the green of the Sultan, the white horsetail of the Pasha himself. Trumpets answered across the sea. Guns rolled into formation, drums beating time like a heartbeat of the empire. Within hours, thousands of soldiers began landing at Marsaxelok Bay. Boats slammed into the shallows, ramps dropped, men splashed ashore waist-deep in surf. They dragged siege guns the size of towers through mud and heat, slaves straining at ropes until their skin tore. The earth shook as the first cannon was raised facing Fort St. Elmo. Its barrel alone weighed 7 tons. Its name was the Basilisk. The first shot roared across the water and smashed into the fortress gate. Stone exploded outward. The battle for Malta had begun in earnest. Inside the city, de Valette climbed the rampart to watch the impact. Dust and fragments rained down around him, yet he stood unmoved, cloak rippling in the wind. Below, gunners scrambled to reload their cannons. Smoke drifted across the harbor, blurring friend and foe alike. The Grand Master turned to his aides. "Mark the hour," he said. 8 in the morning. Let the chronicles show when this island began to burn." Throughout the day, the defenders tested their guns, adjusting angles by inches, trading shot for shot. Every volley shook the city's foundations. Walls buckled, roofs collapsed, but the line held. Men cheered each direct hit as if it were salvation itself. When ammunition ran low, they melted church bells into cannonballs. When the cannons overheated, they cooled them with holy water. That night, the island glowed with fires visible from Sicily. The sea itself reflected orange, turning the harbor into a mirror of flame. The wounded lay in corridors where monks moved silently, pressing linen to open wounds, whispering prayers over the dying. And still the cannons fired. The following morning, de Valette received his first casualty list. Dozens dead, hundreds wounded. He signed each name with his own hand. Then he wrote a single line beneath it. "The enemy has landed." He ordered the parchment sealed in the Oars archives. No one expected to write another. By the 3rd day of the siege, the thunder of artillery had become part of the island itself. The earth shook with every shot. Men no longer flinched when walls crumbled. They simply cleared the debris and kept loading. Fort St. Elmo took the first blows. It stood alone on a rocky peninsula, guarding the mouth of the harbor, the key to everything. If it fell, the Ottomans could sail straight into the Grand Harbor and cut Malta in half. Every gun on the island turned towards it. Mustafa Pasha ordered continuous bombardment. For 7 days, cannons hammered St. Elmo day and night, reducing towers to dust. Cannonballs tore through ramparts, through men, through memory itself. The defenders patched holes with sacks of earth, timber, even their own fallen comrades. Inside the courtyard, Brother Maturin tended the wounded. He had been a surgeon in France before joining the order. Now he worked with rags, salt water, and faith. He moved from body to body, whispering Latin prayers over men who could no longer hear. The Grand Master sent daily messengers to St. Elmo. Each one carried a simple question: "Can you still hold?" Each day the answer came back the same: "We can." The Ottomans built trenches inch by inch towards the walls. Janissaries advanced under wooden shields, firing matchlocks through slits. The knights responded with flaming oil, arrows, and grenades made of clay pots filled with nails and powder. Smoke turned the sky black. By the 10th day, the fortress was a ruin of stone and bodies. But still, at night, the defenders repaired what the cannons destroyed by day. They worked by torchlight, hands bleeding, hauling stones back into place. Their commander, Captain Miranda,
was found sleeping upright against a cannon, sword still in his hand. Mustafa grew impatient. He sent word to Turgut Reis, "Bring your guns forward and finish it." Turgut's engineers dragged the great basilisk within 200 yards of the wall. Each shot now hit point blank, exploding powder magazines, blowing men from the ramparts into the sea. The air reeked of salt, iron, and blood. De Valette refused to withdraw them. He knew that every hour St. Elmo held bought one more day for Birgu and Senglea to fortify. When his council begged him to recall the garrison, he answered, "If St. Elmo falls, all Malta falls with it." On June 22nd, the fortress was barely standing. Half its defenders were dead, the rest were wounded, blind, or burned. Yet that night they held a final mass in the chapel, whose roof no longer existed. They knelt among the rubble as cannon fire flashed around them, chanting the credo until dawn. At sunrise, the last Ottoman assault began. Wave after wave of Janissaries stormed the breaches. Knights met them hand to hand, fighting with broken blades, daggers, even stones. When the banner of the crescent finally rose above the ruins, fewer than 60 defenders remained alive. They fought to the last man. When the smoke cleared, the fortress was gone. Turgut Reis lay dying, struck by a cannon fragment from one of his own guns. His death enraged Mustafa Pasha, who ordered the mutilated bodies of the fallen knights to be nailed to crosses and floated across the harbor toward Birgu. The Grand Master stood on the wall and watched them drift by. He made the sign of the cross and said, "These men have shown us the road we must follow." From that moment, the defense of Malta changed. The siege was no longer about walls or territory. It was about vengeance and faith, about proving that the line had not yet broken. The fall of St. Elmo did not end the siege, it ignited it. For every knight who died on those walls, 10 Maltese took up arms. Fishermen became gunners, monks became surgeons, children became runners carrying powder through burning streets. And as the sun set on June 23rd, the cannon fire paused for the first time in weeks. The sea was calm again, but the island was not. In the dark, the Grand Master whispered a single line to his captains: "Now we fight for their souls." The death of Fort St. Elmo was meant to break Malta. Instead, it hardened it. The guns fell silent for only one night. At dawn, the Ottomans turned their cannons on Birgu and Senglea. For weeks, the harbor shook like thunder rolling through stone. Dust hung in the air so thick that the sun vanished at noon. Every church bell cracked from the vibration. The enemy believed the knights were finished. They had lost their forward fortress, half their artillery, and a third of their men. But inside the ruined walls, De Valette stood taller than ever. He walked the ramparts without armor, so his men could see him unafraid. When powder ran low, he rationed it by hand. When the wounded cried out, he ordered his surgeons to treat peasants before knights. He knew the soul of the island depended on fairness as much as faith. Mustafa Pasha massed his forces for a decisive strike. 2 bridges of boats were built across the harbor to link his armies on both shores. If they could take Birgu, they would crush the order in one blow.
On July 15th, as dawn lit the water, 30,000 men advanced in 3 columns. Their drums beat the same rhythm that had once carried them across half the world. But on Malta, that rhythm changed. It became the sound of death. The knights waited behind shattered walls, cannons loaded with nails, chains, and broken masonry. When the Ottomans reached the range of musket fire, de Valette gave a single nod. The batteries opened in unison. Flame and smoke erupted. The harbor disappeared behind a curtain of fire. Bodies fell into the shallows. Boats overturned. The first assault broke in less than an hour. Mustafa ordered another and another. For 6 days the battle raged, streets filled with corpses, the sea turned red with mud and blood. When the Janissaries breached a wall near St. Michael, de Valette himself led the counterattack. He was 70 years old, sword in one hand, rosary in the other. An enemy spear struck his leg. He tore it free and kept fighting. That single act spread through the fortress like fire through dry grass. Men who could barely stand picked up weapons again. By nightfall, the Ottoman banners had been thrown back into the sea. The cost was unbearable, but Birgu still stood. Weeks dragged on. Heat and disease began to do what swords could not. Rot spread through the Ottoman camps. Water ran foul. Food spoiled. Morale collapsed. Every night, Maltese raiders crept into enemy trenches, stealing powder and supplies. They moved like ghosts through smoke, vanishing before dawn. Mustafa's soldiers began to whisper that the island itself was cursed. De Valette used the lull to strengthen every wall, every gun, every heart. He had no reinforcements, no fleet, and no promise of rescue, only faith that Spain would not abandon them forever. He wrote in his journal, "If God wills it, help will come. If not, we die in grace." Then, in early September, a rumor reached both camps. A relief force had sailed from Sicily. 8,000 Spanish and Italian soldiers under Don Garcia de Toledo were coming. At first, the knights refused to believe it. Too many promises had been made and broken. But on the morning of September 7th, lookouts saw sails on the horizon. Crosses, not crescents. Europe had returned. Mustafa threw everything he had into one final attack before the reinforcements could land. Every cannon, every man. The air shook with continuous fire for 12 hours. When the smoke cleared, the Ottoman banners had not advanced an inch. That night, the defenders watched flames rise from the enemy camp. Tents were burning, ships pulling away. The invincible empire was leaving. At dawn on September 8th, the feast of the Nativity of the Virgin, the people of Malta gathered in what was left of their churches and rang the cracked bells one last time. The siege was over. 40,000 had come, fewer than half returned. De Valette knelt on the rampart of St. Angelo and thanked God for mercy bought with blood. He had held the line for 4 months. Europe still stood. When the guns fell silent, Malta was a graveyard. The sea around the island was black with ash and broken ships. Whole villages had vanished beneath the smoke. Every wall was scarred. Every stone carried a name. The order counted fewer than 200 knights left alive. Most were wounded, blind, or missing limbs. Thousands of Maltese civilians were dead. But the survivors refused to mourn as victims. They called themselves the keepers of Europe's gate. Across the continent, church bells rang. From Rome to Krakow, from Madrid to Vienna, the news spread faster than any ship could sail. Europe had not fallen. A single island had held back an empire. Suleiman the Magnificent never recovered from the loss. He died the next year, still vowing to erase the Knights of St. John. His generals called Malta a curse, a victory denied by faith stronger than iron. De Valette did not celebrate. He walked the ruins of Birgu in silence, counting the cost stone by stone. When his captains asked what should be done, he pointed to the ashes and said, "From these ruins we will build a city that will never fall." Within months, masons returned with chisels instead of swords. They built a new capital on higher ground, laid out in perfect geometry with walls that faced every direction of the sea. They named it Valletta, after the man who refused to surrender. Every wall was carved from the same limestone that had survived the siege. Every street pointed toward the harbor where the crosses of the fallen had drifted. For the rest of his life, de Valette lived within those walls, never leaving Malta again. When he died in 1568, the people buried him beneath the city he had imagined during the darkest days of the war. Centuries later, Valletta still stands, its stones pale and weathered, its churches filled with light. Tourists walk where the knights once bled. Ships glide through the same harbor where the Ottoman fleet once burned. The scars remain, but so does the silence that follows courage. The siege of Malta was not the end of an empire, nor the beginning of another. It was proof that faith, discipline, and sacrifice could hold the line when armies could not. It was a reminder that a few hundred men and a single island could change the course of civilization.